What did Donald Trump reveal about the Libertarians? What can we learn from the 2024 Libertarian Party Convention, which was historic in more ways than one?
Our world is lost in unnecessary fear and hurt. Our systems seem scientifically engineered to make you small, powerless, and always waiting for the next great leader who will fix the problems around us. Worse, we're witnessing neighbor versus neighbor while warfare breaks out around our family tables. But you have access to a spirit, a strength that enlarges and empowers you. Even better, you don't need to wait for the next big movement. You can heal the world. It's time for governance by grace. Welcome to Gracearchy with Jim Babka.
I should say right up front, more so than perhaps any other episode, the Zero Aggression Project, our sponsor, is responsible for part of why we're here today, not only in terms of practical support for this show, but also in terms of the principles that underlie this show. ZeroAggressionProject.org, www.zeroaggressionproject.org. Like, subscribe, sign up. It helps to promote all of what's important about Gracearchy and all of what's important about what you believe that matters in the world. Several people have told us, I really like that Donald Trump episode. They're referring to episode 96, Should Libertarians Party with Donald Trump, which we ran just a few weeks ago before Trump's appearance at the Libertarian National Convention. They liked it because of what was covered, even the way it was covered, both of which were unique. Now, Libertarian Convention's over. Donald Trump gave his speech, and Jim Babka is going to have some more unique things to say. In fact, he's going to draw on his experience as former state chair, national campaign staffer, and very long-time professional observer of the party. Jim, clearly Donald Trump's speech was big news.
Kind of took over the news cycle. Brought the Libertarian Party in with him, right?
Yeah.
I want to focus more on what the lessons or implications of him being there today were, but the real news wasn't just Donald Trump at the convention. To me, as a constant observer of this party, who knows a lot of the people that were in that room. I know dozens of them, perhaps scores of them. I have 1 degree of separation, let's say, from every person that was in that room.
Yeah.
And I think there's other things to say about what happened there, way different than what everybody else is saying. Like, so literally, what everybody else is saying, I think we can say some stuff. And to be clear, I think we now know, by the way, Bill, what Donald Trump was doing there, and it should have been obvious to us all along.
That's where I wanted to go, because the content of the speech is nothing new. You know, I watched enough of it before I could follow.
It was a little bit new. I mean, he promised a cabinet level position to libertarians, said that there would be libertarians in senior levels. He made a pledge to commute Ross Ulbricht.
Yep.
And it's Ulbricht. People say Albright. It's not Albright. It's Ulbricht. Starts with a U. Silk Road founder and creator, if you want to look him up. And he got a big cheer when he did that. And then he asked for the Libertarian nomination, and he stood in front of a sign that said "Become Ungovernable," which was the theme of this convention, and it was very edgy. After coming in on his typical, proud to be an American Lee Greenwood theme song,
right?
And giving that kind of speech, but he was booed, he was catcalled. We'll get into that here in a second. I just want to say there were people, Bill, who said that this was an automatically terrible thing. And from a political view, I wasn't sure it was smart to invite him to the convention, but I reserved judgment. And if you go back to the episode that we did with Dan Fishman and with Perry Willis,
96.
Episode 96, you'll see that I'm not taking any strong claim. I wasn't asserting a view at that juncture on purpose. I really wanted to see where this thing would go, because it was already going to happen, and I wanted to make sure it was going to be done right. It turns out that it wasn't, and that's part of what I want to get into here today.
So, what was Trump really doing there?
Okay, well, now we know. We know no. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is running, and he is going to suck a lot of independent, as it were, vote. He is going to basically suck the air out of the room from the other two parties that routinely run candidates and have been more long-standing, and that is the Libertarian Party and the Green Party. The Libertarian Party has been around since the early 70s, and the Green Party has been around since roughly the 90s in their present incarnations. And they do much better when they have a celebrity at the top. So when Ralph Nader was their celebrity in 2000, they drew significant attention. They were the third party. When Gary Johnson was the Libertarian nominee in 2016 with Bill Weld on his ticket, so you had two twice elected governors, that became the third. This year, the third, such that it is, the room is for RFK. And he wanted to try to secure as much of that. Trump is trying to divide and secure as much of the third-party independent vote as he possibly can. So there's this statement that Thomas Massie made many years ago. He's a congressman from Kentucky and a Ron Paul supporter when Ron was running. And he said, we were very excited. We thought that we had this libertarian revolution coming. People were starting to read Mises and Hayek and even Friedman, and they were starting to talk about, our values and views. And then Donald Trump came along, and so a lot of our people went to him, and it turned out that what we really were was the craziest people in the room. But when he walked into the room, he took over. He was now the craziest person in the room. And there is an independent or third party streak that doesn't care whether or not their candidate's going to win. They're protesting, they're speaking up. And in American politics, we've gotten into this before, the whole wasted vote discussion.
Yeah.
People actually pretend as if their vote matters. This is part of the facade. It's a faith-based view. There's no evidence for it whatsoever that your vote means a thing, especially in a diluted presidential election. It is literally a raindrop in the ocean. But people do try to handicap or pick a winner and feel that their voice is best heard with that. Well, that's true even amongst a third-party crowd. They will tend to pick out the person who's going to do the best to express that. And that person will also get the most attention from the media. The media's only got so much room in its Overton window. Outside of that window, yes. Outside of that window, they don't operate. It's that nothing exists. It's a black hole. It's space. It's empty. They won't give the coverage. So Donald Trump is trying to find a way to edge in to that space and put a dent in the threat that maybe Robert Kennedy poses to him and try to recapture that vote. And by the way, he was a little bit successful, because all the party needed to do was not nominate one particular candidate in that room. That candidate came in second place. And so there are defections already that will go out and begin voting. And the video has been already played, and the alt-right and the MAGA right have already capitalized on this. They're already trying to go out and say this party's lame. It doesn't want to succeed. Look at all the offers that were made to you. So I think he was largely successful in what he's doing. Now, it still may be a tempest in a teapot. Donald Trump was right about one thing. This is a 3% party right now. And given with Kennedy in the room, it's probably a 0.5% party. And so I think that he may not have succeeded in getting everything he wanted out of it, but that was the play. He didn't expect to get the party's nomination, even though he asked for it. They were booing him. He was having fun with them back. That was him launching. He's a master at using television, and that was him using television.
Yeah, with you all the way on this. There's I'm not sure how to parse the whole internal Mises caucus, Mises MAGA caucus within the Libertarian Party. How significant a thing is that, Jim?
Well, the Mises caucus has definitely been, and we're going to get into a little bit of this today, I think, has definitely had a right lean to it. even though they brand themselves. And if you talk to many of their rank and file, they like to use the unfortunate appellation of anarcho-capitalist.
Right.
This is branding hell. I don't know why anybody would call themselves this, but this is, if there ever was a rebel pose, that's it. But what it means is significant. What they mean is we don't want people being dominated by some governing force. That's the anarcho part.
Right.
And we believe that people should have a right to trade with whomever they want, whatever they want. That's the capitalist part. They are pure in both senses. And I would argue, I know that there's a lot of people who are involved in anarchy proper, that these are the most pure anarchists that you can possibly find if they really go the full distance. Unfortunately, they don't. They tend to make these little carve-outs on cultural issues, especially immigration. And I've debated with these people in the past. It's unfortunate because at the end of the day, they've got this tortured view about what order things should be dismantled in, and even this idea that discrimination is a fundamental good in some ways. And I completely just don't agree with that. So becoming ungovernable wasn't 100% what they tend to always mean across the board. And we're seeing this in how they're handling the Chase being nominated.
Right. We got to talk about that because that's a significant moment here.
So it's interesting because the anti-Trump libertarians were also able to make clear, Bill,
right,
that they're not part of the political right by all the shouting and catcalling and all the interviews that they did with international media that came to the event. That Trump brings media with them, and so they were in the media cycle. You did not have any trouble finding stories about this. And most of the media considered and thought even that this Trump's appearance here reinforced that the libertarians are part of the right. It is a stupid, dumb, I don't know if I've said this before, really stupid trope that I keep hearing. Libertarians are not part of the right. And in fact, their existence is born out of the fact that the right didn't want them. They were rejected by the right. Maybe we'll get into that someday. But the party's birth was literally out of the right because of a severe split over issues like the counterculture in Vietnam, just to pick some examples.
Yeah, that was.
And the libertarians were, when they finally, it was wage and price controls imposed by a Republican president by the name of Nixon that was the straw that broke the camel's back. So that it was a free market economic move. They said the Republicans don't really mean anything that we actually agree with. And then what they really mean are the things that they hate the most about us. So they left because there was no common ground left anymore. And so they actually have a lot in common, just as much in common with the left as they do the right, which I would say is not a lot. But I want to point out, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was also at this event. It didn't get at the same media coverage by a long shot.
Nothing.
But he was at that event. He was there the night before speaking. So 2 nights in a row, they had 2 of the top 3 candidates there speaking, and this party invited Joe Biden. And he would have gotten a reception every bit as hostile as the one that Donald Trump got. So this it wasn't strictly an anti-MAGA thing. This party has its own views, and those views are not represented by the 2 mainstream parties. It is something distinct and unique. And the way to see that is on what's called the Nolan chart, which was a device invented by David Nolan, who was the key founder of the Libertarian Party. And you can see it at the advocatesforselfgovernment.org. Go to selfgovernment.org. Advocates.org. And full disclosure, I'm employed there. It's one of my jobs, one of my many part-time jobs. And but at the advocates.org has this quiz, and you can see the Nolan chart there. But what you see is that there is a left and there's a right, but there is, in a diamond sense, there is something that transcends both sides that says we believe in total economic freedom. We believe in total social or personal freedom. And that is not something either party believes. In fact, they're better at those 2 things than the respective parties that claim to be on those sides. They transcend in the sense, in that freedom sense. So that got far less attention, but it shouldn't be overlooked.
We're going to come back to that near the end of this podcast because there's a really an additional interesting way of being able to look at that left-right thing that has more to do with human respect and less to do with politics. So we'll come back to that. Talk to me a little bit about the chairman who sort of represents the right side.
Yeah, so
How do we talk about these?
Angela McArdle was reelected, and she was she's a lightning rod figure at this point because she's the leader of the caucus, the Mises caucus, that took over the party lock, stock, and barrel 2 years ago. And when I say lock, stock, and barrel, I mean 17 out of 17 seats were elected from that caucus. The party had never, ever, ever seen anything like that before. They were very well organized. And she's the one that negotiated this deal to bring Trump in.
Yeah, I've read something about that, how she stuck to her guns.
She did stick to her guns, and she's not afraid to. I mean, I got to give her full credit. When she puts down a position, she understands that heat's coming with it, and she'll say, you're allowed to hate me. You're allowed to be angry at me. You can hold whatever opinion you want of me, but here's what I'm going to do. And this is it. So she constantly, and in fact, she did it throughout the weekend, acknowledges that she's not everybody's cup of tea. Yeah. She's just going to do what she believes needs to be done in a given situation. I have to say, that's a very libertarian attitude, and I kind of admire it. I don't agree with all the decisions, as we're going to go to in a second here, but to say up front, I know what the price is here, and I'm going to do it anyway. That's principle. So now she got what she wanted, which was a lot of media attention coming to the party by virtue of the fact that Donald Trump was there.
So it didn't there weren't points to be made here. There was just attention to be given or gained.
Well, and I think this is where things break down. This is precisely the place where things break down. So when Perry Willis was on the previous episode that we did, he suggested that if it was publicity you would pay for, it's good publicity. If it's publicity you wouldn't pay for, it probably is not. That was his heuristic.
Yeah.
He's had that for a very long time, former national director back in the 80s and 90s. He did 2 different stints in that role. And I think as a general rule, that's true of any enterprise, particularly a political one. Now, they don't share that view. They believe in something called new media, and they believe that what they should do is be as edgy as possible. And this edginess has constantly caused trouble, and it has divided the party. And to the point where I think there are people who that's what they want to do. They are edgelords, and they want to divide. So my problem here, and I really want to give specific case examples of it, is I think if you're going to do something that's designed to draw a lot of people into your tent, a lot of people to come to your event, a lot of people to notice who you are, you should deliver. Let me say this another way. Let's say that you've got a girl that you're looking to date. And I mean, I realize that's not a role for us today, but let's go back in time. You got a girl that you want to date, okay? And you're really attracted to her, and she has said yes. She will go on a date with you. And you show up at the date, unbathed, unkempt, right? You didn't even brush your teeth. You just, maybe even got food in your teeth. You got a shoddy t-shirt on. It's got holes in it, right? You didn't even bother to put on shoes, right? And then you're going to expect her to pay for the date. Like, how do you think that's going to go?
Right.
Okay. So if you put the effort into getting people to come, then what you ought to do is put your best foot forward. You ought to dress for the part. You ought to present yourself a certain way. You ought to have certain considerations about what you want to do. So in the nonprofit world from which I come, there is always the next thing. Okay. If we get all these people, what do we want them to do? If we get them to do that thing, what do we want them to do? And it is an endless regression of what's next. What do we want here? How do we want this to go? What are we trying to accomplish? And how do we draw or attract people into that? Okay. So it's not just
management, right?
Exactly. It's not just getting attention. Getting attention is the first step. And you can do things, even good things, even decent things that undermine your message. And this is where my problem begins to set in. So I'm going to start off with the first one here. I want to put up some images on the screen. If you can go to the first image, I want to show the past, which is Harry Browne.
Yep.
This is 1998. Now, we're going to give you a full picture of another stage 2 years later in just a moment, but Harry Browne was a candidate that walked out of central casting. He looked the part. And the stage is designed to be three-dimensional. And if you'll notice at the bottom, this was an era where we were transitioning from people calling 800 numbers to get packets of information to going to a website to get information. You'll notice that they made sure that that was in the camera shot. It's like right there. It's kind of hard to take a full frame view of him without seeing that. And if you'd have pulled back, you still would have been able to see that. The idea was they were on C-SPAN, gavel to gavel coverage, and they wanted to make sure that people were watching, because C-SPAN was somewhat of a big deal back then. They wanted people to be able to see. This is the very first convention I attended. And I was sitting near the front of the room. I'm only 3-4 rows back, as I recall, from in the center while this is happening. I remember this moment. I mean, not this, I don't know what the specific second was, but I remember this speech. I remember this talk. And this was branding. This is marketing. This is presenting yourself. This is putting on the suit, literally, and looking the part. This is making sure that you have the goods. Now, let's go to the next slide, please, because I want to give everybody kind of a further out view. This second one is going to come from the 2000 convention, which was held in Anaheim. It's the second national convention I attended, and I was there this time working for the man you just saw. I was his press secretary. I worked for the Harry Browne campaign, and this is the stage that we had. Now, I don't know if you can see this, but there's, you know, all the way off to the far side of the screen, you can see there's a table set up with people who are doing officer and AV type work, right? They're managing, they're going to do this, the management of the business meeting. The podium is reserved for the camera. The podium is in center. Nothing else is in the center of the stage. And once again, there's messaging. Now, the photo we've got here is kind of grainy and not high res, so you can't see everything, but it was designed so that when the camera started to move around, it picked up messaging we wanted to deliver, and again, put the best foot forward for the party.
Yeah,
you with me so far?
See the party things on the left and right up above the podium, and there's text behind it.
Yes, and it was, you know, we were trying to make sure, again, right beneath the mic was how to follow the party. The website's there, the 800 number. All right, now let's go to this current convention. And I want to show Chase Oliver getting his acceptance speech, which was done at about 10:30-ish at night, Eastern time. And there's a story to this, and that is that Chase did not get selected until the 7th ballot. Things were that acrimonious that he had to do a final. You have to get 50% plus one, and he get to be the nominee. And he had to have all opposition removed from the ballot. He's at 49 and change on the 6th ballot against one other person. And on the 7th ballot, he finally defeats what they call none of the above, which is always on the ballot. And if you can't defeat none of the above, there would have literally been no libertarian candidate. And even at that, 36% of the convention voted none of the above. That's how strong the rejection of him is. That's how deep. He is not from the Mises caucus. And so the Mises caucus opposed him because their candidate had just been removed after the 6th ballot. So they're standing in front of kind of this curtain that's like just kind of lighted certain ways. I can't even really tell what its base color is. It appears it might be white with some yellow coloring on it that kind of goes out orange, whatever. And then, it looks like there's even a tear in it, right?
There. Yeah.
And notice how there's like people sitting there with coffee cups and stuff on the side. Okay, when I watched the acceptance speech on the official LP feed, he was in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. He was a quarter of the screen. On the left-hand side, they had the Google Doc that had the secretary's notes on the screen. That's how much respect they paid their nominee at 10:30 at night when they finally picked him. Let's do one more slide to give you everybody a better view of what happened. And there's a story that's actually attached to this slide. But we'll pull back, and you'll be able to see on the side the people who are running the convention. They're not off to the side. They're stage center with all of their computers and laptops and coffee cups and everything else, water bottles sitting off to the side. Not even looking at the person speaking. They're kind of looking down at their phones or whatever. doing their thing, and they're all kind of up there, right? And do you see any contact information up there? Do you even see the name of the organization present anywhere up there?
Oh, it's obvious. It's California, man.
Yeah, it's California. There it is. Okay. The gentleman standing up there, his name's Dan Johnson. Dan's a great guy. I know Dan. And Dan decided to use this moment to propose. So he ends up getting engaged right after this. He got up and did an engagement proposal
Nice.
here. But let's go back to the curtains. Now you get a more full view of the entire stage. This is the thing that they put out on TV, often with a shaky camera. This particular camera angle, camera angles. One was far back, and this one was close, and this one was incredibly shaky. It just bounced. I can't even believe the picture is as clear as you're putting here, because it was constantly doing this. Like it was sitting on a table, and everybody was shaking it. Okay, and this is what people saw. If you watched on TV, this is what they saw. So you've got you're trying to get the world to tune in to what you're doing, and this is what you're presenting to people.
It's just tacky.
Yeah. So I wanted everybody to get a sense of what was and what is now, and this is the first failing. I want to get into a second failing. So there are some people in the Mises caucus, Michael Heiss in particular. I've had conversations with him. I have personal respect for him. He has asked for advice and counsel, and I'm grateful that I have that relationship. I like talking to him, but that's going to offend. I just offended people, because you're not we're going to get into this, but the acrimony and the bitterness on both sides, the scapegoating that even goes on, is so horrendous that just saying that makes me a bad guy. Like, how dare you talk to him, right?
Right.
And so let me be completely clear to the other side. I'm wearing my gold shirt right now. I'm a libertarian. I support Chase Oliver. That's who I'm going to vote for president. Okay. So all this fighting for a show called Gracearchy, I don't endorse it, but let me just go on. They've asked stuff about the Harry Browne era, and I appreciate their interest in the Harry Browne era. And they are the most likely to talk about Harry Browne. Of all the different people that exist in the room, they are the ones most likely to invoke his memory. The candidates that they put up the last few times were no Harry Browne.
Yeah. We haven't
not
had
even
a Harry
remotely
Browne.
close. Not even remotely close. And what I mean by that, one of the things I mean by that was that the campaigns themselves were auditions. So I was on the 2000 campaign. Bill, we ended up booking 853 interviews from February to November for our candidate. Those interviews were done primarily on talk radio, but we had national cable. There was no alternative media back then. We had national cable appearances on Fox News and MSNBC and all the rest of them. Like, we were doing the whole thing. We even got on Meet the Press, and I've talked about that story here before. We did some great work to make that happen. That work didn't start at the convention. It didn't, like, these candidates the last several years have come and said, oh, if you nominate me, I will. No, we were already doing before we even got the nomination. And that's why in both cases, when Harry ran in 96 and 2000, he won on the first ballot, because it was an organized campaign that had staff, paid staff. It was raising money, and it was doing events. So in 2000, going back to the campaign I was on, we were doing hotel events where you were requested to come in business attire, which back in 2000 meant that men wore ties, or at least a suit jacket, and women wore business suits or skirts. That's what that meant in 2000. We were putting our best foot forward. And if we had fewer than 40 people in an event, and our events went up quite a bit from there, but 40 was kind of the base. If we had fewer than 40 people for an event that we paid for at a hotel, where he came and spoke, and everybody put their best foot forward, we sent out press kits to the local media that this event was coming. Back then, that included all the TV stations getting a beta tape, FedEx to them, so that they had B-roll to run in case they didn't actually make it to the event because some other news event pulled them away that night and they couldn't get a camera crew there. We did all of this spade work, okay? We showed up at the convention with professional TV ads, which weren't made on a small video cam in the easy desktop way that they can be made now. They required actual production studios at the time, and we had incredibly compelling TV commercials that we shared as part of the nominee. This was a breakthrough at the time. And the week before Harry was nominated, he was in New York on a media tour. He appeared on shows like Hannity and Combs. So he was in New York City on a media tour. He flies out to Anaheim, does the convention, gets on a red-eye plane and goes back so he can be in studio in Washington, D.C., on C-SPAN's Washington Journal the next morning. And that kicked off a week of media that we did in D.C. It was already all booked and set before we got the nomination. So this is extraordinary. Gary Johnson did a lot of the same things. There was an audition going on. This is the kind of campaign you're going to get, and you could see its impact. It wasn't wait until you nominate me, and then we'll get our stuff together. And in about 3 weeks to a month, we'll be up and running. It'll be great. And that's not what's happening here. Third, there was an inability to schedule anything in this convention, and things were all over the place. They thought it was more important, even though they had Donald Trump coming and the whole world coming on Saturday night. They thought it was more important to reelect their chair. They thought it was more important to go through a whole bunch of things. They put off the presidential nomination until Sunday, and it took 7 ballots, and it was excruciating watching the whole process play out. It was not good television. Now, they have good people in the audience who kept suspending the rules and trying to find ways to make things move faster. So there are some smart, good people there who wanted to turn this situation around, but it wasn't scheduled or agended correctly. And so you have to have your nominee selected before Donald Trump arrives. Let me say that again, because this is crucial. And this was already known for weeks. This was being widespread discussed. You have to have your nominee before Donald Trump arrives. And they failed to do that. That's my 4th point. Now, with some legitimacy, they can claim that, this isn't their fault. It went 7 ballots or whatever, but they didn't start until Sunday. So it's not really true. Like, they could have really put effort into having that nominee selected by Saturday morning at the very, very latest. And they didn't do that. And they've contributed to their own problem, the caucus has, because they went scorched earth. And they didn't really have any room for anybody else in the discussion. This is how they've operated the whole time. It's been very much, and I recognize this because this is the kind of chair I was. And this is what happens when you get involved in politics. Leave, follow, or get out of the way. Everything is some great existential crisis, and we can't possibly work with people we don't like or whose views are different than ours. We're just going to run them right over. That's what happens in politics. I did it. I know. It's why I gave up my membership in 2002, because I didn't like the person that I had become. But on the flip side, their opposition is full of thin-skinned people who over the last 2 years have quit because they lost 2 years ago. And they weren't there. They weren't present. So this thing was really left up to chance here by both sides. There was no room for understanding or appreciation of each other. And this is part of why they couldn't get to the point where they get their candidate. In fact, if it was so bad, Bill, that if the caucus itself had said, we need to elect our nominee sooner, the other side would have instantly assumed, with knee-jerk reaction, that it was because of some plot they had, some nefarious plot to undermine the party. And you heard some of that coming out of Dan when he was on the show. Like, I can't stress enough that there's so little understanding between these sides. And I'm not saying that they don't have legitimate things to debate. Okay? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there is so little humanness between them that they automatically assume, even when the right thing is being proposed, that maybe it's the wrong thing. But you have to have your nominee selected before the opposition party leader that you've invited in, who's going to bring all this media, is selected. And he should have never been in a position, Donald Trump, to say, you should make me your nominee. That shouldn't have been a possibility at that moment, because it was already done.
So is this a money thing, or just an awareness that what's the real issue here?
Which part of it?
Okay, bungling everything so profoundly.
Oh, it was. I think a lot of it was a money thing. I think they've lacked resources. Their resources have been down. So all of this division, all this acrimony has cratered resources. And they had some last minute things that related to the convention that caused a spike in income right before the convention for them. But if you go back as recently as a month ago, that wasn't true. I mean, they were down significantly. And it's because of the division. There is no, you hear about political parties having a big tent.
Right.
There's no tent.
There's no tent.
It's their teepee.
Yeah.
And the other side's like, no, we're not going to go to that teepee and expand the tent. We're just going to refuse to participate. I mean, I don't have any, I know people on both sides, but I have no trunk for either of their arguments. I just don't, because they're not grace. And I want to get into this. I really want to talk about what I think's gone wrong here.
Yeah, you mentioned it, the human side of this. Right?
Yeah. No one is focused on grace, Bill. No one. That's why, as part of this, watching this and knowing several of the participants and hearing how they speak about each other, I've been able to speak to them because I'm not part of their feud.
You're the third party in the third party.
Yeah, and maybe not after today, because they may take what I say here badly. And I'm sorry, but maybe it just needs to be said finally. And maybe this convention is the moment that causes it to be said. Because there's this debate that's been going on for quite some time. I'm going to say roughly a decade. About thick versus thin libertarianism. And there's a professional class of libertarian that is not always associated with the party. They're small L libertarians. They've even taken to calling themselves classical liberals, because they were always kind of embarrassed of the party, who introduced this idea that if you believe that the zero aggression principle, the idea that we basically have to let each other live as we see fit, if your view is that we should never initiate force, and that's the end, the sum, the total of your libertarianism, then you have thin libertarianism. Thick libertarianism brings other things to the plate and explains why this is more of an ethical system. For example, you can't be a libertarian and a racist. You can't be a libertarian and be sexist. You can't be a libertarian and be this ist or that ism. It brings other things to the package. And it tends to be held by people who have a slightly left-leaning aesthetic. And they want to import those things into. Now, I've talked about this many times before. The left is always more progressive. They are always thinking about the future and where they want to go. The right tends to be much more reactionary, which is, we're pretty certain that the way our parents or grandparents or great-grandparents or somebody had it before we came along was the better time. And they don't want anything going. And they definitely want to slow down. Maybe they think they're going to, you'll hear them say, we're going to hell in a handbasket, but they want to slow the trip as much as possible. So they're kind of anti any kind of advance in the direction that ultimately will come. The progressives win this conversation constantly over time, and the generation to come will validate or rubber stamp the decision that was resisted by the previous generation. That's what the conservatives tend to do. There was an article that was written that was very seminal in all this by Jeffrey Tucker, who ironically is the target these days because he became very much an anti-C+, that thing that spread around the world and we all experienced. I don't use the word because of censorship by various platforms. He has written quite a bit about this and done work opposing the regime on all of this. But he wrote an article about a decade ago, and I don't remember the exact year, contrasting these, and he called the thin side brutalists. Basically said they had no thickness. They had no meaning to what it was that they were proposing. And so he was arguing that this other package of stuff also needed to be brought in at the time. And ironically, the people who felt the same way as he did are the ones that turned on him early in the C+ epidemic. So the results of this whole way of thinking have been absolutely horrid. And the results of the Donald Trump infusion into our system have been bad. And that is that everybody is focused on culture war stuff now. The whole culture's this way. And this has seeped into the party. So Dave Smith, who was supposed to be the Mises candidate this time around, issued a apology on Twitter. He said that the caucus, the Mises caucus, was to shed the party of, amongst other things, wokeness, which is not the thing that should be the focus of libertarians. He talked about Michael Rechtenwald and his campaign, which, by the way, his primary theme was anti-woke. He was the best candidate to step up and came within a hair of winning this race. He also concludes by saying that he congratulated Chase in person, but he wasn't going to endorse, or vote for him. And ostensibly, this is the Mises Caucus candidate frontrunner for 2028.
Right.
Okay, this is not big tent behavior, and this is an exercise in missing the point. So I believe that the pastor and the pornographer should be able to sit at the same pew at the Libertarian Convention. They should be able to have a conversation with one another. They should be able to get along with one another. They should find that even though they may return from the convention to very different activities, that they are able to get along with one another in a libertarian setting. The beauty of libertarianism, the aesthetic beauty of libertarianism, is the two people with very different values about how they pursue happiness are going to differ from in their real lives. They're going to be in different social settings, but they can get along when they're together. They're interested in each other. They view each other as human beings, and they're not engaged in culture war against one another. They're not going to use the coercive power of the state to express their personal values. So, Bill,
that's the one right there.
The unique sales, and by the way, we've talked about this all along. We've talked about the Nazis going down the street in Skokie, and you invite them on the stage for lemonade. My role model for this is Daryl Davis, who's got Klan robes, more than a couple dozen Klan robes hanging in his closet because he has spent time with people who literally hated him and learned to get to know them. And because he treated them like human beings, that opened a door to change their heart. And we're leaving that behind. And I just, this is what politics does. This is your brain on politics. And it's not the right thing to do. So I'm going to break this down because everybody's had a hard time with this thick versus thin. And it turns out, just like everything else, there's a third way. It's not thick. It's not thin. Watch. The unique proposition of libertarianism should be that I will never use coercion to achieve my social goals. I will choose voluntary and persuasive methods to tackle any social challenge we have in front of us. I might invent something. I might organize a group of people. I might be so busy, all I can do is give a little bit of my time or some of my money. But I will choose ways that do not coerce anybody. No guns to get what it is I want. That's libertarianism's unique sales proposition. That is the most important thing. That is the thing that unites everyone, allows everyone to sit down and have lemonade together. Okay? The thickness should come from grace. That's where the thickness should be. If you want to bring your meaning to it, you say, well, because I believe in grace, because I believe in the inherent dignity of other human beings, the imago Dei, the image of God, that everyone's made in, that all men are created equal, because I believe those things, I'm going to reach out and extend grace to people who are different from me, and I'm going to start modeling that right inside a party called the Libertarian Party. That's where you get the thickness or the meaning for it. It comes out of that imago Dei. Okay?
Yeah, I'm with you on this so far.
Okay, so I want to make 4 grace points that break down and explain specifically what should happen and why it should happen. First, it is too often the case that the issue is surface and visceral matters. Surface in that it's not at the root. It's right out in the exposed area, right? It might even be the branches of the tree, for God's sake. It's just so surface. It's not getting to what's really going on. And visceral in the sense that it's designed to get you emotional. And the emotions that politics tends to tap are number 1, fear, and number 2, anger. Those are what they're trying to tap constantly. So take Bill Clinton. He was involved in a complicated financial corruption scandal that was the Whitewater controversy. It had an independent counsel, and they had a very hard time getting the public to understand what was happening there, and they had a hard time putting together charges for it. But give the guy a Hummer in an office adjacent to the Oval Office, and all of a sudden we have a cause celeb, and everybody can talk about that. And ultimately he was impeached, not convicted, but impeached on the basis that he didn't tell the truth about the fact that it happened. So here's this large thing that he actually did, and we're going to focus on this little thing that's much more visceral. and has nothing to do with corruption. Zero to do with corruption. It didn't get into the Whitewater land deal. It didn't get into the failure of the Madison Guarantee Savings and Loan or the Clintons' relationship with Jim and Susan McDougal. Why is this? Why is this? It's because of the conflict machine. So the conflict machine is a better word for our politics than politics. Politics is an inadequate word to describe what it is that goes on in the American system. At the Exit Network, which we referenced in another episode, here's another article. This was one of our 3 most important articles we put up on the site. The conflict machine explains our politics. What is the conflict machine? Let me start with reading the article. Here's a more precise definition. A system to address social problems that divides members of societies into warring parties where there must be losers. You'll notice I didn't say winners in that sentence. There must be losers. We're going to be divided into warring parties, and we're going to choose who loses. Everybody does, ultimately. The system needs lots of losers to pay for the winners. Okay? The machine is turned on whenever someone creates a proposal where those who oppose it are coerced into compliance or are forced to foot the bill. The conflict machine, then, is fueled by coercion. Some people will have to abandon their preferred way of life or face a penalty, even if that way of life harms no one. Their happiness must be sacrificed to the proposer's idea of the greater good. These appeals to the greater good almost always hide both the coercion and the lost happiness. As a result, aggression becomes culturally acceptable. The conflict machine is a better name for our politics. There should be a party, Bill, that is different, that isn't part of this system. But when they allow the culture war stuff to seep in, they don't stay different. So the people on the left don't like some of the things that the Mises caucus have said, and they said we cannot possibly work together with you in any way, shape, or form. And I understand where they're coming from. But the reverse has also happened. And it's happened to the degree that they're not going to support the nominee, as you just heard.
Yep. That fractured the party.
It fractures the party. These issues are designed to get us at each other's throats, to see the worst in each other, but never, ever deal with the root issue. That's point number 1. The issue is too often surface and visceral. Number 2, the issue becomes a person who isn't like me. Since we start focusing on these culture war issues, we start focusing on people and we start identifying them. Everybody, in fact, everybody these days is into identity politics. This is a curse. So it's so bad that once this starts to happen, people lose their principles and all they care about is defeating the other side.
Yeah.
So going back to Bill Clinton had some things that were worse in his background sexually as well. He had sexual harassment and even an alleged rape charge in his background. And feminists became his most zealous defenders. You heard that correctly. And they said, well, in fact, there was even a famous feminist that said, well, sometimes you got to take one for the team. Okay. We did a whole episode about making the other side cry. It's essentially what it boiled down to. We talked to Jerry Boyer in episode 94. In Mimetic Mirror, Jerry Boyer explores Jesus' eye parable. It's the parable of the eye, the beam in your own eye while you're trying to remove the speck from the other eye, that got into this obsession we develop as human beings about how other people view us. By the things that they say somehow are being attacks on our identity. You are literally defining me, and you're telling me how much you hate me because you dislike a guy I'm a fan of. Okay? So I would encourage people to delve deep into that episode. It's short. It's about a half hour. I think it's an under half hour episode. Go watch that Jerry Boyer episode. We'll put it in the link. But this is endemic to what I'm talking about here. But there's a way out. And I developed the conflict machine under due to a relationship I have with Chris Rufer, who has this philosophy of human respect. What I think might be his greatest innovation is this idea here. And I think we could put the whole thing up on the screen right now, right, Bill? It's called the values quadrant.
Coming your way.
And I would like to break down and explain to people what the values quadrant is.
Yeah, this is good stuff.
So there are 2 things that we can look at in terms of social interaction. One of them is values and the other is ethics. Now, we could put a modifier on each of these things, and then you would understand it even clearer. everyone has personal values. These are things that they prioritize as important to them. And then there is a social ethic, which has to do with how we interact with one another. So in your personal values, you could choose, if you're following the quadrant here, you can be either more progressive or more conservative on balance. You could be somebody whose aesthetic is more concerned about progressive issues or conservative values. Those you can choose those perspectives. A proper message that follows this unique sales proposition I've spoken of recognizes that these people will be able to sit with one another and work together on the grounds that they're going to let each of them live their values as they see fit, pursue happiness as they see it, flourish in so doing, or experience the consequences of their actions. Because, maybe they're doing the wrong thing and they'll pay for it. But as long as they're not picking in your pocket or breaking your leg, as long as they're not harming anybody, as long as they're not aggressing against others to get what they want, we're going to let them live their life and figure out how the world works and live by their own values. Okay, that's the values part. So now we get down into the ethics breakdown. There's two ethics we can choose. This is the USP. It can be either coercion or persuasion. If you choose coercion, you're progressive, you're a Democrat. If you choose coercion, you're a conservative, you choose Republican. If you believe that I should be able to impose my values on the other party, that's how you do it. So there should be something really different. And this is what Chris Rufer and I call human respect. Human respect says that I'm going to look at you as an individual and you have your own happiness that you're pursuing. So why does someone, I got to close by asking this, why does someone need to be just like us? And why do we believe that we are right about everything?
Right? Yeah.
Why can't others be different from us? People we can learn from or observe, so long as they don't impose their values on me. And this is a real libertarian question for you. Why aren't we free to explore and learn and develop these virtues or consequences on our own? And that's what this chart is designed to get at. Okay?
It's, well, it has to be said, but we've gotten really bad at persuasion. I mean, horrible at persuasion. We just carry big sticks.
Yeah. Or shun people or shut them out or shout them down or cancel them.
Cancel them.
Yeah. Okay. So I think this thick-thin thing has turned into an internal culture war cancer. So what about the thickness? This is my third point. I think we need to return to the thickness of grace. The issue should actually be human respect. So human respect's philosophy, the structure of it, starts with an axiom that everyone wants to be happier. And I want to add to this. I want to contribute this to this conversation. I think every person, this is also an axiom. An axiom is a self-evident statement. You don't have to prove it. It's just everybody goes, okay, got it, right?
Are there any of those left?
Yeah, there are. You do expect the sun to come up tomorrow, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Every person's happiness is as important to them as your happiness is to you.
Yes.
Let me say that again. Every person's happiness is as important to them as your happiness is to you. And we have another version of this. It appears in almost every world religion, all the major ones. It appears in many philosophical systems. It's called the Golden Rule. And we've talked about it quite a few times here. The most famous formulation of it is Jesus Christ's version, which is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But you could also say don't do to others the things you wouldn't want done to you, which more closely traces with one of the Hebrew versions. There are several other variations of it. Don't get hung up on the words. Focus on what they mean. They imply that you have some understanding that every person's happiness is important to them as your happiness is to you. And because of that, you're going to change your behavior. And I'm going to tell you why, because there is a natural principle that you can see like gravity. We can repeatedly observe it, and it gives us the ability to make predictions. And it's called the natural principle of human respect. And here it is. Human happiness, harmony, and prosperity will always decrease as persons experience the initiation of violence or the theft of their property or time through force or fraud. In other words, when you vandalize or steal, or when you harm or kill another person to get what you want, when you even threaten to use those powers to get what you want, that coercion. You diminish people's happiness, harmony, and prosperity. And like gravity, it's a cause and effect relationship. We can repeatedly observe the diminishment of happiness, the reduction of social harmony, and the destruction of prosperity. We can see it. And because we know that every person's happiness, their ability to flourish is as important to them as it is to you, then we make a decision that we're going to stop doing that stuff. So if somebody has an aesthetic or wants to do something you don't like, it's not your business. Your aesthetic tastes are not, their aesthetic tastes, I should say, are not your business. Now, last point.
How do we get out of it?
Exactly. Okay.
Right.
Great question.
Yeah.
This is very hard to do for the reasons that were covered in the Jerry Boyer episode. And it's why I advocate the imitation of Christ. What I'm calling, we have an episode we basically have labeled, Bill, our most important episode. So the other homework isn't just Jerry Boyer's episode, which refers to this. More fundamentally, we go through in episode 88, Rene Girard, the founding of religion and state. And we explain in episode 88 the mimetic rivalry, the imitation that goes on. That's what the mimetic part of it is, that leads to a rivalry that heats up so bad that the only solution is the destruction of another, a party that's blamed, may or may not be guilty, but not culpable. They're not the cause. They have some degree of innocence, if not complete innocence. We scapegoat that party. And this is a social dynamic that is at the foundation, at the root of the tree for religion and for statism, both. And that's why they have these cultic aspects, which even the secularists in the Libertarian Party recognize as, quote, the cult of the omnipotent state. That's in the Libertarian Party statement of principle. So this strong tendency to rival and even scapegoat, I want to replace that model. And it involves going the extra mile with who? With who?
With your enemy.
With your enemy. Trying to understand them and trying to figure out where the commonalities exist. And I've already laid out what the commonality is. We should have the same social ethic, even if our personal values differ. That's what it should be. And if you need to bring thickness to it, then you bring this cause of grace with you. Now, I don't know what shape that takes for you. I have a hard time believing this can be done if you don't have a spiritually higher source.
Yeah, this is not the keep your friends close and enemies closer.
No,
this is an I don't know, an exponential improvement on that.
Right. So that's where I'm closing today. I think this is very difficult, nearly impossible to do without Christ as a role model, as the person we choose to imitate, as opposed to the things that are available in front of us that we could choose to embrace and imitate. Maybe we want the power of someone when there's can only be one chair and we want to be chair, or we want to be the nominee. And because we're at rivalry with each other, we get darker and darker in our personality. But people from the outside who see us acting like something existential is happening recognize that we look an awful lot like our enemy. Our enemy and us look a lot like we're looking at each other in a mirror as we get closer and closer to the thing that we envy of the other. And that we end up scapegoating, we end up destroying. And ultimately, I believe this is a spiritual question and not so much, Bill, a political one.
Well, sure. All of politics looks the same. So if you want to differentiate yourself, marketing 101, people, you've got to find some new way of doing that. And what if the new way of doing that is persuasion? What if the new way of doing that is grace? What if the new way of doing that is the imitation of Christ that people like to talk about but don't often do? Right?
Yep. I think we've said it all. Good close there, Bill.